To understand his ideas, let's imagine Dewey reappears in the modern world with the mission to implement his theories in a conservative school. Dewey championed learning by doing, also known as experiential learning. He observed that children learn better when they are actively engaged because they are immersed in the present and not a distant future, such as final exams. In biology, students don't read books, but instead grow plants, harvest fruits, and then feed them to snails to see what happens. Sometimes things work out, sometimes accidents happen. Whatever the outcome, the students take notes of their observations and form rich, memorable experiences. At the end of each class, they summarize their learning and turn to discussions. The discussions prepare the students for life in a democratic society where decisions ought to be based on reasonable arguments. Through the debates, the children learn to formulate their own ideas, convince others, and learn to see the world from a different point of view. In one discussion, some started to argue that school uniforms limit self-expression and that they should be abolished. Dewey, who believed that schools should prepare children for life itself and serve society as a force for innovation and reform, encouraged those students to start a petition to find out for themselves if real social change is possible. Classes are interactive because Dewey believes that interaction with the environment is essential for the learning process, since education is an experience that is subject to constant change. Passive recipients of knowledge, on the other hand, learn very little, if anything at all. The group who started the petition present their ideas to the teacher and start a dialogue that expands their understanding and underlines their learning. Learning is interdisciplinary. Dewey believed that continuity is critical to comprehension and that an interdisciplinary education allows students to build on what they already know, which strengthens their understanding. What they observed in biology is being calculated in math, written about in English, and put into images through the arts. This provides the students the opportunity to learn how things are connected. To the brain, this process is more effective because it can link new knowledge with previous experiences and build stronger mental models. Dewey believed that when societies calculate the price of education, they shouldn't only look at the cost of school buildings, teachers' salaries, and other resources. They should also consider the costs of all the hours input by the children. Because the children are the future of our society and human progress, their time in class ought not to be wasted. It is thus the school's responsibility to be a playground to practice a future we wish to see, so when the kids grow up, they can go and create it. About education, Dewey famously said, "It's not a preparation for life. Education is life itself." The group that sought dress code reform gained a deeper knowledge about the topic and were able to develop good arguments. They printed their demands on. To understand his ideas, let's imagine Dewey reappears in the modern world with the mission to implement his theories in a conservative school. Dewey championed learning by doing, also known as experiential learning. He observed that children learn better when they are actively engaged because they are immersed in the present and not a distant future, such as final exams. In biology, students don't read books, but instead grow plants, harvest fruits, and then feed them to snails to see what happens. Sometimes things work out, sometimes accidents happen. Whatever the outcome, the students take notes of their observations and form rich, memorable experiences. At the end of each class, they summarize their learning and turn to discussions. John B. Watson famously claimed that if he were to be given a dozen healthy infants, he could shape them into anything: doctors, lawyers, artists, beggars, or thieves. regardless of their background or genetic predispositions. First, he completed experiments with 8-month-old Albert, and later he applied his theory when raising his own children. In essence, he applied the scientific method to human psychology, which he called behaviorism. With the little Albert experiment, Watson used the method of classical conditioning to program a baby to be afraid of a lab rat. Earlier, Pavlov demonstrated how conditioning can trigger biological responses that are inherited genetically. Watson hypothesized that we can also instill new behaviors that were not inherited. To conduct the experiment, Watson and his assistant Rosalie Rayner placed the boy in a room where a white rat was allowed to roam around. First, the boy showed no fear. Then, Rayner struck a steel bar with a hammer every time Albert reached out to touch the rat, scaring Albert and causing him to cry. Eventually, Albert tried to get away from the rat, showing that he had been conditioned to fear the rat. Weeks later, Albert showed distress towards any furry object, showing that his conditioning had not only been sustained but also generalized. Watson assumed that our behavior is either a reflex evoked by a stimulus or a consequence of our individual history of earlier exposure to reinforcements and punishments paired with our current motivational states and stimuli. Unlike Freud and Jung, he was not interested in thoughts or the mind because, in his opinion, the analysis of actions and reactions was the only way to apply the scientific method to psychology and get objective insight into human behavior. He thought of psychology as an objective branch of natural science. Its goal, the prediction and control of behavior. Like his fellow behaviorists, he believed that intelligence, temperament, and personality are determined by the environment in which the child is raised. Watson published The Psychological Care of Infant and Child. In his book, he advised parents not to touch their children too often and keep an emotional distance so as not to spoil them. Playing with children, he warned, would interrupt their routines. A happy child doesn't cry or seek attention. His book became a bestseller, and soon other scientists of his time advised against showing affection. Some Western governments started to hand out leaflets advising that parents should stop kissing their children. Parents developed the idea that children should be left to sit quietly during the day. At night, they should be left crying alone until they fall asleep, a method called sleep training. Watson, who had a difficult childhood, wanted to be a good father and applied his methods to his 4 children, John, Mary, James, and William. Unfortunately, things didn't turn out as planned. John complained throughout his entire life about intolerable headaches and died early in his 50s. Mary developed a drinking problem and attempted suicide, like her brother James. William took his own life at age 40. Watson allegedly admitted that he regretted writing about child rearing as he realized he didn't know enough about it to do so. Towards the end of his life, he became reclusive, and prior to his death in 1958, he burned all of his recent papers. What do you think? Watson was convinced that the kind of nurturing we receive can determine our life path, claiming that he could turn an infant into any man he wishes. In his own family, though, depression and bad habits were passed on from generation to generation. Does this happen due to genetic predispositions, or is it the effect of a child's unfortunate upbringing?
Lawrence Kohlberg's theory claims that our development of moral reasoning happens in 6 stages. The stages themselves are structured in 3 levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. To understand this better, imagine a conflict at school. There is a fight in the schoolyard. 2 ninth graders are beating up Tom. Those who watch the fight are at different stages of moral development. Let's see what they do and how they justify their behavior. At stage 1, we make moral judgments based on obedience and punishment. Finn's sense of good or bad is directly linked to whether he gets punished or not. Finn sees what is happening to his friend and wants to help, but he doesn't because he is afraid the teacher may punish him if he gets caught fighting. He asks himself, how can I avoid punishment? At stage 2, we are motivated by self-interest. Mary decides to intervene and help Tom. She knows that she might get punished, but she also knows that she could become a victim herself someday. If she helps Tom now, he might help her in the future. She is asking herself, what's in it for me? At stage 3, interpersonal accord and conformity guide our moral judgment. Betty sees the fight and wants to intervene, but when she realizes that all the others are just watching, she decides not to get involved. She wants others to see that she is a good girl who is conforming with the ethics of the community. She asks herself, what do others think of me? At stage 4, we value authority and want to maintain social order. When the teacher sees the group fighting, he immediately steps in and shouts, "Stop! Fighting at school is forbidden." He feels that, above all, it is important to follow the rules, otherwise chaos breaks out. He feels it is his duty to uphold the rules that sustain a functioning society. He asks himself, how can I maintain law and order? At stage 5, we understand rules as a social contract, as opposed to a strict order. Jessie, who watches from afar, is not sure how she feels about this. To her, rules make sense only if they serve the right purpose. Obviously, the school rules prohibit fighting, but maybe Tom deserves to finally learn his lesson. Just yesterday, he punched a young girl from grade 1. She asks herself, does a rule truly serve all members of the community? At stage 6, we are guided by universal ethical principles. All those involved now have to face the headmaster. He first explains the school rules and why they exist. He then clarifies that rules are valid only if they are grounded in justice. The commitment to justice carries with it an obligation to disobey unjust rules. The headmaster's highest moral principle is compassion. He believes that all people should learn to understand each other's viewpoints and that they don't feel alone with their feelings. He asks, what are the abstract ethical principles that serve my understandings of justice? At the pre-conventional level, Finn is driven by fear and Mary by self-interest. Both judge what is right or wrong by the direct consequences they expect for themselves and not by social norms. This form of reasoning is common among children. At the conventional level, Betty responds to peer pressure, and the teacher follows the rules. Their morality is centered around what society regards as right. At this level, the fairness of rules is seldom questioned. It is common to think like this during adolescence and adulthood. At the post-conventional level, Jessie knows that things are complicated because individuals may disobey rules inconsistent with their own morality. The headmaster follows a universal ethical idea, at complete disconnect with what society thinks or the rules say. To him, everything is solved through compassion. The right behavior, in his opinion, is therefore never a means to an end, but always an end in itself. Not every person reaches this level. The American psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg based his work on Piaget's theory of cognitive development. In order to confirm his theory of stages of moral development, Kohlberg interviewed boys between the ages of 10 and 16. He analyzed how they would justify their decision when confronted with different hypothetical moral dilemmas. We will now present to you the most famous moral dilemma Kohlberg presented to his students. Let's see what you would do. The Heinz Dilemma. A woman was on her deathbed. There was only one drug that the doctors thought might save her. The druggist that made that particular medicine sold it for 10 times the price of the production costs. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, was poor and could not afford to buy the drug, not even with the financial help of his friends. Heinz then asked the pharmacist to sell it to him for half the price, but he refused. To save the life of his wife, Heinz broke into the man's laboratory and stole the medicine. Now tell us, should Heinz have stolen the drug? Would it change anything if Heinz didn't love his wife? What if the person dying was not his wife, but a stranger? Should the police arrest the druggist for murder if the wife had died? Please write your answers and their justifications in the comments below.
Vygotsky's theory of social development argues that community and language play a central part in learning, while Jean Piaget concluded that children's cognitive development happens in stages. Vygotsky rejected his ideas and believed that children develop independently of specific stages as the result of social interactions. Vygotsky claimed that we are born with 4 elementary mental functions: attention, sensation, perception, and memory. It is our social and cultural environment that allows us to use these elementary skills to develop and finally gain higher mental functions. This development ideally happens in the zone of proximal development. First, there is what we can do on our own. Then, there is the zone of proximal development, which represents what we can do with the help of an adult, a friend, technology, or what Vygotsky called the more knowledgeable other. Last, there is what's beyond our reach. To illustrate this, let us think of twins who were raised in a community in which boys are expected to learn and succeed, while girls are only expected to be pretty. At the age of 10 months, both have the ability to crawl and are in the zone of proximal development for learning how to stand on their feet. The more knowledgeable other, in this case the father, provides the boy with opportunities to practice in a playroom that he has equipped with scaffolding and other objects. The boy is encouraged to explore the equipment, and eventually he uses it to pull himself up. A few hours later, he's cruising along the structures, and a few days later, he's standing on his feet. The girl also has the potential to stand, but does not receive any support in learning the skill. When we compare the two, we see that while the girl is still trying to get up, the boy has moved into a new zone. He knows how to balance while standing, and now has the potential to learn how to walk. Both will eventually learn how to walk, but according to Vygotsky, the boy will be more skilled. The same principles apply to all learning and the development of higher cognitive functions, and only those learning with the assistance of a capable mentor can reach the full potential of their ability. Vygotsky therefore believed that inside the zone of proximal development, learning can precede development, which means that a child is able to learn skills that go beyond their natural maturity. He also established an explicit connection between speech and mental concepts, arguing that inner speech develops from external speech via a gradual process of internalization. This means that thought itself develops as a result of conversation. Therefore, younger children who don't finish this process can only think out loud. Once the process is complete, inner speech and spoken language become independent. Lev Vygotsky died of tuberculosis in 1934 at the age of 37. Despite his young age, he became one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He left the following advice for educators: by giving students practice in talking with others, we give them frames for thinking on their own. What do you think? Can a child learn anything regardless of any developmental prerequisites? And do we learn only through social and cultural contexts? And if so, do you think it is appropriate for a more knowledgeable other to determine what a child should learn next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.